Well, hello, Marcus. Thank you so much for taking time out of your super busy schedule to do this interview with me.
Of course. Thank you, Cynthia.
I am so intrigued by your background. Obviously, you are such an upstanding, renowned musician. And I love kind of the combination of the different disciplines that interweave into your background, including, of course, music, but also psychology and education. And I think that's just such a really interesting kind of medley of forces that you're operating with. And so I'd love to touch on all of those pieces and just kind of, learning more about you and your background and your current experience. Um, but maybe we can start off with the conversation that we had before the recording started in terms of where you are. You're in Columbus, Ohio, and we were kind of touching base about the psychology of being on the road, which is something I have to be honest, I didn't really think of. So would that be a good starting point for us today?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I left home like 1.5 months ago, right? So, and I have another 2.5 weeks in front of me, and just this. Well, psychology is a big word, but certainly it is part of what I'm thinking and what I've experienced over the last 16 years. I really started doing the hardcore touring about 16 years ago. And it's really largely misunderstood, like certainly from the point of the fans, from the point of view from the fans, they don't really know what we go through in order to make these shows happen. But also even within my peers, I think there's so much it's really not so clear to people what it does to you, what it does to your body, what it does to your psyche. And like the mental health aspect has become more um, public recently at least I see some articles about it, maybe in the last 5, 6 years. It's become more of a public affair that people talk about. But really, it's not just like being a traveling salesman or something, Like you have in a way, it's like having, so the being away from home is a full-time job. This is the first thing. On top of that, you travel every day. So we travel between, say, like 2 and 8 hours every single day, almost every single day. And then we have about an 8 hour workday, which is we arrive at the gig at around 3 in the afternoon, and we play at around 8, and we meet with the people, with the fans after, and then we pack up and go back to the hotel, and then it's like between midnight and 1 in the morning. All right, so it's really, you could say it's almost like 2.5 jobs that we're doing, or each one of us is doing um, um, constantly, like almost every day for an extended period of time. And I know that the situation that I'm in is not the norm. Like, I mean, like most people, they get to tour like a week or three, maybe. But with, like the reason why we can do this is we have Tony Levin in the band, and Tony is such a famous person that we can actually do these extended tours, which are also necessary for us to actually make enough money. Like that's the other aspect. So first of all, there's the 2.5 jobs we're doing. Then there is the worry about, like, are we actually going to make enough? Um, and then there is like this hormonal imbalance that happens where we have that push of adrenaline or whatever other hormones actually really can get kind of like overproduced in that moment of being on stage where you have to have like total focus for 2 hours, and you get the applause and like over the years things have just, I can talk about this for a long time, but really it's something that is that's such an in a way it's like being like an Olympic athlete. Um, and alone the loneliest person on earth, and like I'm mostly in a different time zone from where I live. So like even my friendships at home, they suffer when I'm away and stuff like that. So it's really complex.
Wow, that is really complex. And I'm so glad that you pointed this out because I feel like the lay public oftentimes views being on the road as this romanticized notion of traveling and seeing different cities and getting the applause of a crowd. And certainly there might be those aspects, but you really touched on kind of the downside and the grueling aspects in terms of just always being on, both in terms of the number of hours per day but also that experience of always being in a elevated hormonal position. You know, your adrenaline is kicking in a prolonged period of time. And what is the physiological effect of that? I also really appreciate you pointed out the loneliness of it, which I think people might not see at face value because they think you're surrounded by people, an adoring crowd. And that really hits home when you present kind of the story in that regard. And I think it's important for people to hear that side of the experience as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, the romanticized version of it really is absolutely wrong. Like that's the only way I can say it. And anybody who would just be on the road with us for just 1 or 2 days would understand. You would understand that
Yeah.
like all of the things that they believe are the case are not. It's the opposite. You don't get to see anything. You don't like there are days where I have no privacy whatsoever, where I don't even have like a hotel room to myself, things like that. And also the like the work aspect, let's say, makes the of course I like that people enjoy the music, and I also enjoy making the music. Like that's the I make it for the music first before I make it for the people, right? And that's all good, but it really it's there's the balance is really tricky. And Tony Levin, he says like the reason why we do this is because magic might happen, not because
Mm.
magic will happen, you know. And that's really
Oh,
it's really dark. It can be really dark, but I think it's not. I mean, like in on the whole, it's a beautiful thing, but still, just what at least I feel like I have to give is a lot of I have to give up a lot of what people would consider to be a normal life.
yeah. I love the way you frame it in terms of the the amount of output that you're extending for a maybe, for that, possibility of magic. And that's just a tremendous amount of energy that you're extending on a regular basis. And I love the way you kind of capture that experience. I wonder if your background in psychology makes you have kind of an elevated understanding and your ability to give voice to this in such an articulate way. Do you think that psychological foundation helps you understand and navigate what kind of the life that you're navigating?
You know, what are they saying? Ignorance is bliss. I don't
Hmm.
have that ignorance.
Hmm.
So that's how I look at it. Um, it's true, like that I'm maybe hyper aware also of what things are like, and sometimes it can be pretty tough for me because I get very could get potentially can get irritated very easily when I'm in a state of this sort of fragile situation, right? Where, somebody would say something to me that's really not meant in a bad way, but I kind of like interpret it in the darkest light, let's say. Yeah, I think it's both positive and negative. First of all, I don't really have the vocabulary anymore because like I don't really practice in the psychological world that in the how shall I say in the corporate psychological world, right? I don't need to sell myself as a psychologist. right? And I have more freedom also as a psychologist to interact with people because I'm not expected to entertain them or something like that, or if you know what I'm talking about. Um,
Hmm.
so I think yeah, it's the education I had. I studied at University of Bielefeld, which is mostly about experimental psychology. So I have really a great, like a scientific foundation. Like I really was not into clinical psychology at all at the beginning. It was just something that I found out I had a talent for without even being aware of it, you know. But then or early on I got into via some NLP training, I got into hypnotherapy stuff and all sorts of like really interesting um, yeah, I don't want to label it, but I got really into also I got into meditation. Um, and like meditation generally is seen as something that's good for you. But people don't really tell you about the downsides of getting more susceptible to things, right? So like if there's always some work to be done next to the meditation on, you could really fall very deep if you, and it's actually a little bit like the performance. I'm practicing a performance on stage. Even like meditating is some sort of performance if you think about it, right? And the side effect of that focus, of that extended focus you're giving to one specific task, makes you just more, I think, at least for me, more irritable, uh, and can opens doors and opens gateways, both good and bad, let's say, that can change the balance, the personal balance quite drastically. And so, having all of these experiences and knowing about what can and what can happen makes me like on one hand makes me more um, um, can't remember the word now. I can withstand things better, right? But on the other side, it just makes me more vulnerable as well. So, but yes, I think I'm in a pretty unique situation also having had the opportunity never to be in the traditional music business really. Like I've never been signed to a label and things like that, and I'm very much aware of the very negative way that people have been musicians, artists have been dealt with in that world and things like that. But that also meant that I had to build my own business, and so I've basically seen this lifestyle, let's say, from I think almost all perspectives, and it makes me it couldn't it in some cases it makes me a good consultant, let's say, but it can also be a little I can also be a little bit harsh about it, you know.
That's so interesting. What comes to my mind when I think about what you're describing is just the remarkable insight that you have. So, not only at the beginning of our conversation, you were talking about kind of the downside of being on the road so much, but I loved what you said about meditation, almost like the underbelly of meditation and being in that hyper focused mode. We talk about the positive aspects of mindfulness and meditation and your ability to see kind of the other side, as well as what you're talking in terms of the underbelly of some of the aspects of being in the music world from, being on a label. And that insight, it feels very comprehensive that you look at things from different angles, not just the good, not just the bad, but it seems like you have a vision of understanding things very holistically.
I sure I'm very good at dissociating myself also, so I can always go on some sort of meta position and observe myself, and like I'm very good at like understanding that my thoughts and feelings are not that's not me necessarily. I'm very good at that. And like and I spoke to that with with Michael, um, that um, people don't understand. So, for example, I'm also sort of a specialist for polyrhythms. So I practice experiencing different things at the same time, but as individual units. I don't experience the world as one in that case, but it's what a teacher of mine called the division of attention. So like and this is something I practiced. And I remember when I did that, when I had my first breakthroughs there in 95 with the division of attention, I really experienced like was almost like a fist to my face, what that meant walking through the world with that added level of awareness, let's say, of what's happening around me was not, it wasn't nice. Like no, and nobody had prepared me for that. Like that's something that you practice can make you so give you negative results, let's say, for what you're used to, right? I'm not saying it's actually negative, but at first you're coming from a different place where you're not aware of certain data, let's say, and then the data comes in and you don't know how to deal with it. And part of that is, yeah, that division of attention or the sleight of hand stuff that the practicing of the instrument actually does, like where it's about just getting to any note on the fretboard with any finger at any time, for example, which is sort of like you could say is more like a sport than music, right? But since I had never had the aim of practicing music. I just wanted to practice myself as a tool for music to come through me. And that's why I focused very strongly on just the technical side of things. And that really puts me into a position where when I get together with other people to play, or whatever, that quite often I feel that they have this response of awe to what I do. And I know it's not really something that I really attribute to myself. Obviously, I spent the time getting to where I am, but I know that what they experience is actually the result of my work, of the work I did. So it's not something that is inherently like just my character or my personality or a me, but just the result of the work. And sort of that's sort of like the cycle I'm in. Like I practice, I get to a different level of my art, let's say, right? And then I have to sort of then comes the process of integration of assimilation, of of how can I operate in the world with this new knowledge, let's say, right? And that's the challenging part. And for me, because I have that awareness of a psychologist, or even that I'm interested in that, I always sort of like self-analyze. I
Hmm.
sure do.
It almost feels like you have this ability to, I mean, we all walk around the world looking through our subjective lens, and it's almost like you have this ability to detach from that and look at things very objectively. You use the word meta, and I almost visualize you as kind of above yourself, viewing what you're doing in an objective manner, and then later integrating into the cells. And that feels like a really interesting process. I don't know if I explained that correctly.
No, it's I have a concrete example for that if you want. Like so some of the pieces that we play with Stickman, I've performed, I don't know, maybe 500 times, right? And so I'm very interested because it's almost that's where the scientist in me kind of like gets activated. Like, okay, every night I can run this experiment. I can observe what I am doing. I can observe my thoughts. I can experience what my body feels like. I can, like I'm sort of like trying to gather the totality of the sensory information, including the digital stuff. So what's happening, what words come or what feelings come and stuff like that. And there's one particular piece in which I've like from the very beginning in 2011, I've started to gather this information and just to observe like from tour to tour, from show to show, how this evolves. Um, like there was like the time where I managed to just let's like what people say to completely silence the inner dialogue or inner monologue, and 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 that was fine. But then I got to a point where I got so good at doing that that some sort of meta commentary set in, and the meta commentary could actually be thoughts like verbal thoughts, or it could be hearing the melody of the next piece that we're going to play while I'm playing this piece and things like crazy things, you know. And I've observed that over the years how this process changes, how there's always like, and this is something that like maybe is really, I mean, maybe even somebody working at a in a in a factory doing the same thing for 40 years will understand what I mean. That even though you do the same thing all the time, things, your experience of it and how you do things just changes over time. And up to a certain point, it also does improve. I really believe so, that you get better at it, right? And yeah, and so just observing these processes in myself has been very satisfying, I have to say. And it actually motivates me when I'm home, let's say, to actually go back to practice.
That's I love the way you describe that. It feels so scientific, and you use the word experiment, and it almost feels like that's a great mechanism for not personalizing. Let's say if there's a mistake or a flaw, if you're looking at the, what's on the assembly line, let's say, to use your example of working in a factory, and you notice that there's a kink in the system, as if you're looking at it as a science project, then you need to tweak something. And it's not that you're necessarily, it feels like it would might be a way to not personalize flaws and to continue to tweak things until they continue to get better. And I don't know if that is a helpful mechanism for you in that way.
But the interesting thing is that I think I'm already a step ahead of that, which is that I don't even experience a flaw.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there may be a flaw, yes, where I'm making a mistake or something. Like the flaw is like within the context of like that piece of music, what note should it have been versus what did I play or did I lose the timing or things like that. I do not really take that personally anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's my mistake anymore. And
It,
I
it's
think that
almost it's almost like you view it as like you would in science, that this ingredient just needs to maybe be adapted, and we have the petri dish and we need to remix the chemicals here, as though it's a working process as opposed to beating yourself up, which it feels like that would produce such great results to look at your your process or even life in general in that way.
yeah, and the interesting thing is that I think like the level I operate at there is so abstract that there is no table of ingredients. No wheel or no knob that I could turn really. I need to just submit to the experience of doing it so that my subconscious can find out how to
Mm.
balance the ingredients. Like it's just too complex of a system for my consciousness to be able to tweak it. The tweaking comes from the subconscious, within the subconscious. So all I can kind of try to make sure is that I'm in a state of trance during the show, where I hopefully manage to open all the gates, let's say, so that my subconscious can do its job. And that's really how I see it these days. Like
Hmm.
obviously there was a time there where it was a little bit different, where there was more of a struggle, let's say, to for the conscious part of me to actually do things right. Um, but now, like, and especially in improvisation, where like there's a lot of improvisation, even in the written parts, I'm always trying to be open for micro variation, let's say, that is unpredictable. I mean, if things were predictable, I would be actually bored. I would not be doing this really. But just the allowing myself the freedom to play things or to interpret things slightly differently every night is what makes it worthwhile for me. And but I don't force that, I don't force or enforce that even. Like I just let my subconscious do its job. And I trust myself enough as a musician that I know I can be in any musical situation. I can be on stage with any musician, any style of music, and I can contribute something that is just what I do in that moment. Like, and there's, I'm, um, I don't have that like with my students. Like I'm currently running an improvisation course, which is 11 months of study with me. And so like one of the first things we came across is like that there's like what I call the cringe factor. So you play a note that sounds wrong to you and you cringe. You have that emotional response of, and like even physical response of like, ooh, this is not right. This is horrible. I like shame. I feel ashamed for playing this. And sort of like to understand that in order to become a good improviser, you really need to, in the end, let go of all of that and just accept that moment of which used to make you cringe as an opportunity to learn, either to learn to say, okay, I now know that that note is not a note I want, so I learn how to avoid it, or you make it part of the color palette you have available, right? And but you can only do that once the physical and emotional reaction um, is like I have to say almost erased, you know. So and that has been like an incredible experience for me in my life to really to really understand that it is okay to not well it's okay for emotions to change.
Hmm. What you're describing is so fascinating. And that ability to tap into the subconscious, and really almost have faith in that the right thing will happen and what will unfold is meaningful. And your ability to be in that space feels like it really taps into something at such a soulful, deep level. And you mentioned that that's one of the mechanisms that you help others when you're teaching. How would you help somebody get to that point? It feels like it's so complex, and I'm curious about what would enable somebody to maybe move in that direction.
Well, first of all, that's obviously very individual, right? But I have found ways, even in group work, to allow for the individual to find their process, you know? And yeah, I mean, like we would have to talk about specific examples so I could give you, but really, in the end, it's about a certain kind of compassion and a certain kind of hypnotic language that I use where I leave enough space for people to put their interpretation. So it's just like classic hypnotherapy thing, really, but just within the context of music education, right?
Hmm.
So I would do this, I would say I would and would just not finish it, and people would kind of like fill in the gaps. And this is not something that I have to do consciously also. Like I can, because I have so much experience, I know how to leave the space for the person to fill in the things with the right vocabulary, let's say, that they need.
Hmm.
And that's really how I do it in the end. I'm just presenting ideas from so many different perspectives, and like also with very encouraging and just very loving and inviting mistakes. Just obviously like explaining again that the only way to learn is to actually experience the thing that is wrong, because then your body can understand, okay, I could go to the left, I could go to the right, I could go straight, I could go walk back, or like all the directions are available, but you need to understand when you're getting to a point where you have that choice. And so I use all of these, yeah, I don't want to say techniques. It's just basically just my experience that I've gathered over decades, that comes together when I'm teaching somebody. And I am really, really proud of so many of the people I'm working with. Some are very quick learners, some are very slow learners. Some people have been with me for 10 or 12 years and started out as like really um, severely paralyzed people, let's say, who've in the end like started making their own albums and really becoming who they always were. Um, just as one example, but I'm just really so proud, and I mean, if there's anything I would say I would be proud of about myself, is that somehow I managed in my lifetime to give people this experience that they can change. Um, and in a way, I think I remember when I was even when I was starting to study psychology, that I didn't believe that change was actually possible.
Mm.
So now, having come to the point where I know that I can initiate change in people if they want to, is sort of like I've had like several moments in my life where I had some sort of eureka moment, or what I could say, like it's just like I've turned around by 180 degrees and things like that. And
Hmm.
this, believing in change versus not believing in change, that has been one of the biggies.
Wow. I love, first of all, your teaching approach, that it's non-formulaic. You're not necessarily using the same steps with every person, teaching them about A, B, and C before they get to X, Y, and Z. It's almost like you're tapping into their individuality, and you're allowing their process, their subconscious to really shine, and what makes them unique. You're almost like helping them unfurl that, which I think is a really beautiful process. And it feels really special. I'm sure your students feel that special individualized care and love and attention that you bring to it. And I also really appreciate you sharing that you didn't used to believe in change. Now you do. And you've had several eureka moments. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share one of those eureka moments that really helped you maybe turn the corner in terms of understanding and appreciating change.
Well, actually, the very first enlightenment, I would even call it, that I had was as a 7 or 8 year old, and it was relating to my parents. It was a moment where I remember I was in bed. My brother maybe had just been born or something, like he was maybe a year old or something. And I remember that I was thinking about my parents as um, I had this very clear thought, which was, I love my parents, but my parents are not me. I have a different perspective on life. I have interests that are different from theirs. And and I mean, even looking back, it's crazy to think about that, having had that as a child. And I'm not 100% like saying it was a positive or a good thing that happened to me at that like, young age, right? But anyway, that was like the like in my what I remember, that was the first moment that I had like this in the experience of enlightenment, where a light bulb actually went on to understand. It was sort of like the emancipation of the self somehow in that moment, to understand like I'm here, I'm on my own, I'm alone, not in the negative sense, but like I have control about what I do, you know. That's what that and it was sort of like within the context, and I really do remember it was sort of like bracketed by the idea I love them. I love
Hmm.
them, but that does not mean I have to be just like them.
Wow. And that is a really young age because when we think about child development, as you know, with your background in psychology, we think about how children at that age are so, they oftentimes adhere to their parents' values and, um, the thought processes and the beliefs are oftentimes so intertwined. And so your ability to recognize how much you love them, but almost even start the process of, you used a word earlier of kind of detaching or distancing yourself
Mhm.
from you. But I wonder if that was the first process when you started doing that with your parents, that recognition that you were different from them. Do you think that was maybe one of the first steps in your ability to have this really objective, um, kind of distant, what was the word you used?
Dissociation is what I used.
Dissociation. Do you think
Yeah.
that might have been the first step there?
Um, I would say no. I think it took me another like in my early 20s, I started um realizing that um the general pattern that people follow is that they are slaves to their emotions.
Mhm.
And so like the way that I see dissociation is basically that you are able to watch your emotions. So it's not that your emotions change or your emotions go away or anything, but it's just that you're sort of like taking a step outside of yourself, and you're able to watch what's going on, which is very powerful to be able to do that. So you're not kind of like controlled by your emotions, which yes, you can still choose to be controlled by them, but you don't have to. Right. So, and
Mhm.
that really was very different from that very first experience I had there with my parents. Like my second, like really the second moment of enlightenment or clarity, let's say, was when I was working as a male nurse. I was working in the urology department, which was basically a cancer department. Um, and I worked there for 2 years, and and I was 19 or 20 years old, something like that. And I like it was sort of like a hands-on experience that we are all the same. That we're all the same. Like there could be like the poorest man dying versus the richest man dying, and I could see how their behaviors would be very different towards the staff, right? For example, but then seeing that is just, you could say, a mask, or that's just something that's put on top of the mere mortal hull that we are, and that like that I remember walking across the corridor, like in that um, hospital, and having this up again. It was really again just like a light bulb, understanding we're all the same, and we 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 come from the place that we go to, like the idea with the ashes to ashes kind of thing. Like it was really such a profound experience, and I think still pretty early on in my life, and that was about the time when I actually started making music for real. Um, and that was one of the most powerful things for me, because I became I still was very lots of anxiety and things like that. I always felt like that, but still, like mentally, I was so clear that there was nothing really that I needed to be afraid of in life, and that we are all just these um, yeah, these bags of flesh that's somehow being solidified for whatever reason with consciousness and our unique ways of seeing the world and our unique ways of feeling. Um, but that was really just a very important um, moment for me.
It sounds mind-blowing. And while you were talking about your experience, I was trying to get into that space of what it would be like to have those feelings as well. And to me, it feels like if I were in that space, it would be helpful to connect what you mentioned in terms of almost distancing yourself from your emotions by by viewing that we're all humans are the same. So here's what I mean by that. I was imagining, um, let's say somebody that I was very angry with, and I'm upset, they hurt my feelings, but now I'm viewing them. We're all the same. We're bags of flesh. We have the same experience on earth. And there's almost like I would feel like that would be a process for me to let go of my understand that the emotions are there, but not be ruled by them in terms of, let's say, if I was angry at them. And I don't know if there's a connection there for you, but both of those experiences sound very powerful and very transformational or transformative.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I wonder, you mentioned that it was around this time that you were really delving into music professionally. Do you feel like some of those pieces were all kind of interconnected with each other in terms of those those eureka moments, those almost like stumbling onto such powerful, deep, um, you know, frames of mind as you're now starting to be a professional musician?
Yes, so basically it was like my both of my music teachers that I had at the time, they were very particular about me not going the professional route in the sense of going to university or conservatory for music. This was interesting, and I trusted them. I because like the argument of one of them was that if you're a professional musician, you're going to do it anyway. So just learn something proper where you can make a living. Really great advice. The other teacher, he told me that he saw sort of like that he saw the composer in me, and he became a great teacher, amazing teacher. But he was very sad. It was almost at the end of his life, of his working life actually, where he said to me, "Marcus, do not do that. You need to be the composer that you are. Don't go to uni. Don't become a music teacher because that's what mostly happens when you're going to uni or conservatory, that you become a teacher in the end." So, so that was sort of like the foundation. That was also the reason why I actually ended up studying psychology, because I remember at the time I had no idea what I wanted to study. I was like in at school, I had good grades in every subject. Like there was nothing that I was really bad at. So I didn't have any pointers really from that. Like, what do I want to do? Mathematics, informatics, those were the things that were like informatics was very popular. That was like for the future and good for the future. And but then I realized, well, at that point, I already thought I already understood what that was. I already knew what that was, so it didn't really um, tickle my interest, let's say. So I got this book with all of the studies that you could do in Germany, and I was just flipping through and like always reading like the first few sentences. And like everything I looked at was like, okay, I know what this is. I know what this means. blah 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 blah. And then once I got to psychology, um, there were like even in the first paragraph, I had a lot of question marks. So what does this mean? How is this being done? And that's really what piqued my interest was like not knowing what this is about, not knowing what experiment like the methodology would be, for example, right? And I was really interested in that, and that's why I chose it. Just because I would did not know what I would find, and anything that I thought I would understand was not interesting to me. Um,
And I
and
love
that's
that
that.
curiosity.
Yeah,
It
yeah. That's really what drove me. You know.
that what I love about that is sometimes when people are deciding on a major, they do the opposite. They pick something that maybe they have a strong knowledge base on, that they're good at, and that they have maybe familiarity with. And I love that you picked an area that you had question marks and you wanted to learn more about. And that feels like a path of discovery that you were really looking for.
What's interesting to mention here is that up to that age of about 20, I really had no experience and also no knowledge and no understanding of what learning actually is.
Mm.
I think I spent the first 20 years, and I think it's sort of like a family thing because I'm coming from a like purely working class background. So there was never sort of like any learning wasn't encouraged, or maybe my parents didn't even understand that there are tools that make you learn things. I've never learned that from them because they didn't know, or they still don't know, right? And I also, because I went to a relatively good school, but because like at that time in the late 70s, um, there still was some sort of class system in place in schools where I was in the class with the what they call the foreigners, right? So I was with the Turkish, Spanish, Greek, Italian people in the classroom, right? Because we all came from a working class background, and we were put into this, and I remember like the other classes groups were like doctors kids, lawyers kids, um, uh, people that work in the industries, where I come from, there was um, like an automobile industry was there, things like that. So really, I ended up in this, but in the end, and it really took me a long time, it was 20 years later, where I realized, oh, that was actually the scum class. And then realizing that we also had the bad teachers, which I was never aware of that. But then looking back, like I remember when I went to the and I don't know how you call that, like the last 2 or 3 years of high school, the school system changes a little bit, and like everybody is in the same class. We don't have the separate classrooms anymore, right? And then realizing all these other people, they've already been performing theater plays in French, like where I didn't even know that there was that option to do that in that school. So like we had never really been informed about the options we had there. And so just um, like that sort of the insights that I was in a sort of an out group in that school, it never occurred to me until I really kind of like saw it, and really only 20 years later I realized what situation I was in. So that also explains why I've only, and I met this guitar teacher called Robert Fripp, who was like the first person who gave me tools to practice. He showed me how I can practice, how I can define an aim, and I can get there with the help of something simple like a metronome, for example, right? And
Hmm.
it was also like it was that age. I was 19 years old. So
Hmm.
that's when my life changed, and there are other aspects in my childhood that really led to me being in a sort of like different situation than other kids. But really, it was only around age 20 that I became self-aware and aware that there is learning in the world. And that's when my curiosity for psychology kind of like came in. And then I started practicing my instrument. And yeah, over the decades, sort of like built up to where I am right now.
Hmm. That's really interesting. When you look back at that foundational experience of learning and what learning or maybe like a lack of formal learning that was imposed on you, do you feel like you bring any of those elements with you now or in the later parts of your life?
You mean which elements?
Well, I one thing that comes to mind is, and this may or may not resonate with you, but you have such a unique and such a intuitive process, it sounds like, of teaching.
Mhm.
And I wonder if maybe the exposure to, let's call it the non-formal learning environment you had could have actually provided a foundation
Ah, I
to
see.
thinking more maybe non-linear
Yes,
fashion.
yes. I think you're absolutely right. Like for example, in because I started learning English when I was about 10 years old, and I remember like that I still have these techniques of memorizing words and like where I do like sort of some sort of free association between the languages, right? Where I like sometimes you just have to swap a letter around and then you realize, it's the same word if you swap that around. Like I always
Mhm.
try to kind of like find the a sort of like in German we actually call it Eselsbrücke, which means donkey bridge, which means you're finding a way to relate to things each other via a third thing that has nothing to do with reality. It's not
Mhm.
it's not that these two words are actually coming from the same root, but I find a way to twist them so that it seems like they come from the same root, and that's how I remember them. And so I've always kind of like developed my own learning algorithms, let's say, or ideas, even when I was, yeah, or maybe because I was in a situation where learning was not being taught as a subject matter by itself. So that's very true. Yeah, I never thought about that before, but it's cool. And also, like I was always, even before becoming aware of what the subconscious is, let's say, I was always very good at applying it by um, um, sort of like by trying to ex like not trying, but by extracting meaning from stories. Like always like having this idea that there needs to be a point to something,
Mhm.
right? And then by understanding the point, and I remember like when I was at university, and we had these in order to there was a lot of learning and a lot of learning by rote involved actually, which I hated, which was totally not what I would do. So I would get together with a group of people and I let the others learn everything somehow, but in our discussions I provided the points. I was saying, okay, the point of this is that it means that, or we could relate this to that. So I was always like the connector, the hub, let's say, for all the ideas or ideologies even. Um, and by making having again, it's sort of like a meta thing, right? By making these connections, I was able to learn everything, every little detail about what the others had to learn by rote, simply by kind of zooming out and 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 making some sort of summary or even invented result or invented connection in order to memorize the data points, let's say. It was really interesting. Yes. Yeah.
Wow. That I feel like that kind of big picture thinking and having that helicopter view, and seeing it from that angle as opposed to maybe the smaller details. I feel like that really lends itself to thinking outside of the box and being a very creative, innovative thinker. Um, and I wonder if you identify in that way in terms of being an out of the box thinker, an innovative thinker, and if that contributes to your musical success.
Yeah. So first of all, I don't think of myself as anything really. Like, but I mean that in a very positive way. Like, I don't think I mean, I would say I do understand a lot, and I am a lot that other people don't know, don't see, because again, like the pattern in the world is that people are trying to just simplify, right? Like
Hmm.
it's like the idea of the Renaissance man, right? Like that was something that was I don't even know if at some point it was popular or it was something good, right? Like in hindsight, yes, like Leonardo da Vinci or like whoever, like mathematician, artist, blah 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 blah. I'm sort of in that category, I think, right?
Hmm.
But it's not something that people appreciate or are wanting to understand. So, for example, like I'm a contemporary classical composer. I was that even before I played a musical instrument, right? But people would say, okay, like, okay, so this piece, this orchestra piece is by the rock guitarist Markus Reuter. I said, no. I mean, yes, for you, you have to say it that way, but you're giving a completely wrong impression about what it may be to the person reading that sentence, right? And so I have kind of like faced this all my life, all my artistic life that I'm not fighting, but I think like people are fighting to understand, really to see me as a broader entity, let's say. They always need to pick out a slice of who I am
Hmm.
and try to make, and I don't blame them. I'm not saying it's not, like it's all right, but it just made it difficult for me to actually have a successful career. Because like you said, like that I have a successful, and it's true. Again, like in from a certain perspective, certainly I'm super blessed and lucky that I can play as many shows that I play, and that like I can even make these experiments every night, and I can practice every night being on stage and things like that. It's a real privilege. Um, but really, like the totality of my interest is really not represented. So, for example, like a while ago, I heard about think tanks, right? I need to be in think tanks. Like I would be able to kind of like think ahead and kind of like think through a million steps ahead. Like I can do that. Like like chess with real world problems. I can do that. But nobody asks me, and it's okay. You know, it's okay. I predicted so many things that have happened in the last 30 years, and I knew them when I was 12 years old. And
Hmm.
it's really interesting to see that. Um, and I have I don't want to say I've made peace because I never really felt super bad about this, but I have put my energy and my love into musical um into the music. Into I don't want to say musical experimentation because like when I'm doing an experiment, I'm not talking about a scientific experiment here, right? But like if I'm experimenting, um I do not treat it like something that needs to be validated. I treat it as something that just is what it is. And it's a process and there's a result. And obviously the result sort of like leads me somewhere else. brings me somewhere else, but it just stands on its own. It's a piece of art. That's where I'm the artist and where I'm not a scientist, is that I can just leave things alone. I can leave them for what they are. I don't need anybody to tell me that is the greatest thing in the world or not the greatest thing in the world, because I did it for myself. I did it for my out of curiosity, really. And that's where I have channeled my, yeah, my interests. And yeah, I mean, I have really done so many things in my life. It's just mind-boggling when I even like in a situation like this where I'm talking with you, just thinking about and like, okay, here's something. So I have been looking for a therapist for years, somebody who would who would be able to work with me. And I always run into these situations where they say they can't help me. And I don't know, like if you're in at all, I'm into this giftedness kind of subject matter, like where I run into this problem a lot. Where at first I was thinking, okay, then let me go to a man who's older than me, who has more experience, like, or I'm just thinking like, how can I have a kind of like have a relationship there where somebody would be able to handle the pure or the sheer amount of experience I've had in my life, or the amount of things I did, and then I remember, like, I see, like, after the first session how the eyeballs are rolling in the heads, of
Mm.
people I'm talking to. It's kind of it's it's shocking sometimes, but really that's sort of also like part of my reality, that and it's funny, like a friend of mine, Nick Birch, he is also an incredibly highly developed artist and human being. He said to me at some point, Marcus, it's lonely at the top.
Hmm.
It was so funny, and he didn't mean that in any negative way. He was just like talking with me. He realized, like, okay, this Marcus understands what I'm talking about, and so yeah, that's also part of my life.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. And as I'm listening to you talk, I'm reminded about how there's such a human tendency to want to kind of label qualities and label situations, and how confining and how almost it can put people in boxes when that occurs. And you know, I feel like even just our in our brief conversation, I really feel you mentioned the the Renaissance man, the Renaissance person. And
Mhm.
I really feel like that type of that quality really needs to shine. It can't be contained in a box. It has to really, I mean, it's overflowing. And a lot of people probably don't understand. There's probably a lot of uncertainty about what that type of quality needs, or what type that person with that type of quality needs.
Absolutely. Like, and it's that un uncertainty is a good word, right? Like, and in a way, like when I talked about improvisation, I was talking about the cringe, right?
Mhm.
That is actually you need to you need to be able to invite uncertainty, right? And that's what's very hard for people to understand, that you may want that joker, as part of your team. Like, in order to actually go beyond what is imaginable, you need the wild card. Again, that
Mhm.
the importance of that. I was always drawn to that, and also that's also a reason why I think I'm a good collaborator, because I'm pretty much, I still have the belief that if more people are involved in a process, you get something out of it that has just more perspectives in it. There is something that may make it a little bit more universal. And I'm not saying that it has to be that way or that it's always like that, but that's what I hope for when collaborating. Obviously I could also always mix my own music. I could master my own music. I could do everything myself, but that's boring to me. I want other people to be in the process. And and so like inviting uncertainty, let's say, is like certainly for my musical process, but also privately, I think it's something that I have sort of a history of challenging people with that.
People who have certainty and maybe is that what you mean, encouraging them
Yeah,
to
who
be
need
more
or
open-ended?
who need certainty or who
Hmm.
like especially it's especially hard for me with people who live in a world of comparison where comparative um, 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 pigeonholing, let's say, is the main mode of thinking. It's very difficult for me because, like, sometimes in discussions, like I could say, I don't think that way. Is this better than that? No, I don't think that way. I experience these things as equal options or as equally valid. Like, and then like the other side could say, oh, you have no opinion, or you don't like it can always be kind of like turned into the negative, kind of like from the perspective of the people that think in terms of black and white, let's say, right? And that's another point where a certain uncertainty would be encouraged. Like, yeah, does it have to be black and white? No, it does not have to be black and white. There are shades, right? And that's sort of like more of my world is to kind of let things just coexist and I personally and most certainly in the last like 4 or 5 years and I think it's an age thing. Like I have gotten to the point where I'm feeling like I'm totally beyond the comparison or based thinking, right?
Hmm. Yeah, there's so many limitations. I mean, when you compare, you're putting the two objects into a box and you're creating a hierarchy. And so I love that you really move in a different direction. And to me, that feels like that quality also lends itself to that collaborative spirit that you're talking about, that you love kind of the mystery of where it will go when that synergy of different uh, voices are coming together or different talent is coming together.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And even within myself, like this is something that um I think that communication in the most basic sense, right? What we when we think about communication, we think about communication between people is right where our thinking box goes when we talk about communication, but we hardly ever think about the fact that we communicate within ourselves, right? And
Mm.
and that has been such a biggie for me. It was part of when I had my NLP training, really to really understand that obviously there are parts of me that sort of negotiate all the time, right? And to understand that like how they negotiate actually influences how I feel. To understand like if I have like some aspect in me that's always shouting, right? And doesn't ask for like, okay, do you want to talk with me? Like, do you want to save water and do you want to shower for 3 hours? So there needs to be some sort of communication between these parts of oneself, right? And so how do I um, make sure or how do I establish a culture of communication within myself where these parts are able to talk to each other with respect and with, like everything that we would want with other people and we hardly and it's kind of crazy how a lot of people they are like very good at like trying to tell you how you need to communicate with other people but where you realize they're not really capable of doing that with themselves. And
Hmm.
that's sort of like where my main interest has, talking about my courses or my improvisation course. It's really what, in the end, what I would hope for is that the student develops a new way of communicating with themselves.
Hmm.
You know?
Yeah, that sounds really remarkable. Communicating with oneself. What comes to my mind is even circling back to your description of not being ruled by emotions. And I'm imagining even that could be a good way to, if you feel yourself getting heated or overworked, and having that communication, maybe the logical part of yourself communicating with the emotional part. It seems like that potentially could be a good way to navigate that situation and having some of that distance. But I also love that you're talking about it as a way, as a means of teaching and helping your students form that self dialogue with themselves as they're developing their musical skills.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I feel like we covered so much territory here, Marcus. This was a really deep and really rich conversation. I'm so grateful. I feel like once we get off this call, I know my mind is going to be buzzing with thinking about all of the elements that you expressed today. And I'm just so thankful for your willingness to sit down with me and share some of your insights.
Yeah, and how interesting that we basically improvised this
We did.
conversation,
We
right?
put the questions to the side and really kind of flowed with from an organic space. And I really appreciate that you were willing to connect in that way.
Yeah, of course. Like very nice to meet you, and yeah, being at your theater was a really wonderful experience. And I hope that at some point I can come back.
It was a thrill. We were so honored to have you there, and we would love to have you back.